Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to bring you guys this other segment on Jason Kelce regarding the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, not coming out of retirement. Jason Kelce seems pretty happy, retired from the NFL, even though it must be hard to retire and then see your team get Saquon Barkley. I would be very upset by that. But regardless, I thought this was interesting just because Jason Kelce spoke to the AP's Rob Maddie about the reasonings behind Philadelphia's collapse from last year. You know, obviously ended up being his last year, and it seemed to be getting off to a great start at 10-1, but then they go on a bad losing streak at the end, and then they finish 11-6. They're still, you know, you look at an 11-6 team, you think, all right, they're doing pretty well. They're still going to be a high seed in the playoffs going into obviously the playoffs. Yeah, they crash out of winning that division title, and now they have to travel and go play the Buccaneers on the road. But in general, if you just look at an 11-6 team, you think that's not too bad. They've had a pretty decent season. But, you know, it all culminated in that game against the Tampa Bay Bucks where you saw really all of their deficiencies sort of pop up at once. You know, the offense showed, you know, the miscommunications, the sloppiness in that game, and just really having a struggle to get anything going at all at any point in that game in response to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or even just getting anything going themselves. You saw the struggles that they had on that side of the ball, and then on the other side, you saw again some more miscommunication, some bad alignments, just a lack of discipline on the defensive side of the ball. And the Bucks, as soon as they picked up just a little bit of momentum, they ran away with it there towards the end, and it just wasn't a good look for this Eagles team that, regardless of getting Saquon Barkley, they obviously did now, but if they never did, this was still looked at as a team very talented, very well coached, at least it seems from the outside. If you look at Nick Sirianni and his track record, almost always in the playoffs and having success in the regular season and getting there, you'd think that there's almost no problem with this team, but obviously something happened, and to point a finger on it, you know, everybody could speculate as much as they want until you kind of get an answer, and that's exactly kind of what we got here from Jason Kelce when he mentioned it, when he talked about one of the points that stood out to him was about the just overall cohesion of this group and how it wasn't really there at all compared to 2022 when they obviously made it to the Super Bowl. He mentioned that right away as one of the main points, the cohesion, you could say the camaraderie among this team. And when I say team, I don't even just mean all the players. I'm going to sort of allude here to the fact that I think it means everybody, the coaches as well, and that the cohesion with everybody, the relationships with the coaches, the players, some of the staff members as well, wasn't all there from just a year ago as well. And he also points to the loss of those coordinators, some of the missing pieces that he said in his statement that were some of the reasons why it all kind of didn't play out. You know, losing a offensive coordinator like Shane Steichen, he gets the job for the Indianapolis Colts, and also Jonathan Gannon gets the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job, and now you have new guys coming in, but it obviously didn't work out ideally as the Eagles wanted it to. But then Jason Kelce got more into this statement about just overall more specific idea of where the issues lied overall with this team, and I thought it was really interesting the way that he put it by saying, on offense, we were simpler, and on defense, we went the opposite way. We completely overhauled our defensive coordinator and system, and you kind of saw the downsides of both of those. Offensively, I think everybody would agree that we probably went too simple, and that got a little bit predictable, and it could put us in situations that were probably harder to execute in. And I thought that was pretty fascinating, just the way that he stated the entire phrase there, but also how he described the offense. Obviously, being an offensive side of the ball player, he gets a good feel of everything and how they've progressed, or I guess in this case, digressed from 2022 to 2023. And it says a lot when I think Jason Kelce points it out like this, just because the offense, in his words, became too simple at times and they became very predictable. And once you see it, once you go back and look at it, and some of the plays that they have were just, you know, nobody really getting open, because one, you could point to the fact that maybe Just the play calling wasn't there, so nobody could really get open. But you think about it a little bit more, and maybe the reason why they weren't getting open is because the system hasn't really evolved ever since, Nick Sirianni got there potentially, or they just didn't see it as a situation where they needed to change too much, because in 2022 they had a good year, they made it to the Super Bowl. So in a way, why change something that isn't necessarily broken? But I think one of the biggest things with the NFL is that, even the greatest coaches, the greatest offenses, it sounds a little cliche when you say it, but there's always something to improve upon just year to year. And it seems, just to me, my interpretation of what Jason Kelce's saying is that, at least on the offensive side of the ball, they might have gotten too complacent, in the sense that, all right, they made it to the Super Bowl, our offense was virtually unstoppable, we might not need to change anything heading into 2023. And they were being shown the results off of that strategy. They started 10-1, but once you get to the playoffs, like everybody says, the playoffs are a different animal. They're a different sort of feeling that you get. Everybody, I don't even know how to describe it. Obviously, not being in the playoffs, but just trying to put my finger on it. Like, everything slows down. Everything just becomes a bit more calculated. And, it seems like everybody has a better game plan for their opponents in the playoffs. And that's where, being a little lackluster, being complacent on the offensive side of the ball, not finding any new wrinkles or any surprises that you can throw in there, really comes back and bites you in those situations, because you're uber preparing for the opponents that you're playing in the playoffs, because you know that your season is riding on the line. So if you're not throwing, any surprises out there, you're basically running the same thing. You're not evolving over the year, not to mention just over the course of the season, but from year to year. If you really haven't changed anything and you've become even easier to game plan around, it definitely shows in the playoffs, and that's exactly what happened for the Eagles. But Jason Kelce also mentioned that their execution wasn't there either, but he believes that now they are in a better spot in terms of who they have on each side, calling the plays on the offensive side and the defensive side, talking about bringing in Kellen Moore and also Vic Fangio, pretty much saying that he's a fan of both of those guys. And I think most people are, and most people believe that bringing in a guy, first off with Vic Fangio, I think just from last year, initially starting with Sean Desai and then seeing the struggles that he faced, not having, necessarily too much experience as a defensive coordinator, and then thinking that it was going to be a smooth transition just from going from him, bringing in Matt Patricia, having him call the plays now, and trying to implement his system into this team halfway through the year was never going to work. One, because already that's a hard task to do, but with this Eagles team, they suffered a good amount of injuries last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So not only did you have a new system coming in, but also you had a rotation of new players coming in, trying to find their footing in this defense, in this team. And with it already not going great, you're trying to learn a new system on top of that. Those two things could never go together. They should never go together. And for the Eagles to come in there and try to, they were desperate. I do acknowledge the fact that you have to try and find a solution, but realistically, with a calm sense of everything and a calm judgment, you would have probably never gone down that route if you had a choice to, thinking back on it now, looking back on that season. But again, you do things just to find some sort of breakthrough in anything when things start to go bad, but and realistically, it was probably never the best option to go down that way. And offensively, you go from Brian Johnson thinking that he's going to call the plays, but according to reports, it was always Nick Sirianni, and it was basically his system with just Brian Johnson in the position of offensive coordinator. Then again, when things aren't going well, you sort of move on from Brian Johnson. You still have Nick Sirianni calling the plays, and even though it looks like a change, you're really not changing anything at all. And that's where, going back to that point I made about the cohesion and including the coaches into that, that's where I think you sort of get these reports now after the fact that the relationship with Jalen and Nick Sirianni maybe wasn't great. Maybe they had some friction at times on the sideline just because Obviously, Jalen is seeing the struggles as the quarterback leading this offense. Obviously, Nick Sirianni sees the struggles as well. But one of the biggest problems that you face, I think, in terms of some of the coaches that separates the good ones, the great ones from, like the elite ones, is the fact that a lot of play callers are very much married to their systems. They'll do anything except change the way that they do things or change the way their offense is run in any sort of capacity at all. And I think that stubbornness to do that, the unwillingness to try and adapt and acknowledge the fact that, all right, maybe this might be a little outdated, or maybe somebody needs to come in here and give me some input on how maybe I could change this, and then that way it'll be the best for our football team. It looked like that was the main reason why sort of Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts clashed last year, because of the reluctancy from Nick Sirianni or just his offense really to change in any sort of way. And you get the struggles, you get the frustration, and then it all just ends up spilling out at some point or another. But I just thought it was fascinating seeing it from Jason Kelce, a guy that I feel like tries to keep everything as it should, keeping it in-house, keeping it all pretty positive. But for him to say this, pretty revealing for his standards. I think it definitely holds a lot of weight. And now you head into this year, and they've done a great thing by, bringing in Kellen Moore, bringing in Vic Fangio, that experience on the defensive side of the ball, bringing in guys like Devin White, CJ back, and along those lines, bringing in Bryce Huff as well. You definitely got better. You're drafting some of the young corners too. You add that plus the experience of Vic Fangio, that'll definitely help. And then on the offensive side of the ball is where it matters most. You finally get Nick Sirianni to almost be the bigger man, take a CEO-like approach like it was mentioned before, and relinquish the play calling abilities to Kellen Moore. And now we should see a little bit more of that evolution, some more changes to this Eagles offense from last year, now heading into 2024, because Kellen Moore does have a good reputation, I think, of just being the offensive coordinator, pretty much having almost all success in every situation he's been in, except maybe the Los Angeles Chargers, but they had other issues to worry about. In a situation now with the Eagles not having to worry about lack of talent or anything like that, he's going to have a great chance here to experiment with a lot of things he wants to do and fully execute his offense with the excess amount of talent that they have available to him. So I like that they did that. I think it took a big step to do that and acknowledge that fact. And that's why, for me, at least if I were to do some power rankings or anything like that, the Eagles would be right up there at near the top of my list, probably 2 or 3, I would imagine, just off the top of my head, just because they almost have everything. It's hard to point out one glaring weakness in this Eagles team. And now that they've, kind of mended their errors from last year, I don't see any way that they're not at least close to the position that they were last year, 10-1, or things like that at some point around the same time of year. So it's good, but you also kind of got a little bit more reasoning why things went bad last year, and now you kind of know it, and you kind of expect to see those errors be corrected in 2024, and I think it'll probably happen. They're too good not to rebound off of this, because if they don't, it's going to get really bad for Nick Sirianni in particular. I think he's pretty much on the hot seat just because they're not going to move on from anybody else except him. So they better find these changes. I think they will, and they're going to be right in the thick of things overall, is my prediction for the Eagles, if it was surprising in any way. But that'll be that. That's what Jason Kelce had to say on some of the struggles from last year. But we're going to move on. A couple more topics to get to on today's show. We're going to talk about the AFC West and some of their biggest questions that still they have to face heading into the regular season. But also, lastly, the last segment will be just sort of a news roundup, talking about some of the bigger pieces of news that broke over the last couple of days that I didn't get a chance to talk about and I just wanted to highlight in the last segment. So those two are coming up. We'll be right back after this short break.